this video, we will talk about e-identity and how it works in the context of e-Estonia. The first two questions that you might have, however, are what is e-identity and why do we need it? Well, e-identity enables both state and private sector services to verify who is the person who's sitting behind the screen. In the physical world, for example, we usually need a passport to travel abroad or a library card to get access to a library. These documents usually have photos and other information on them so that we can be identified before we are allowed to enter or use the services to which the card itself might entitle us. The same has been happening online for many years now as well, but primarily in the private sector. For example, we often need to enter our email address and a specific password to get access to our social media accounts or other online portals. In the case of e-Estonia, the e-ID is linked to an 11-digit personal code that serves as a unique numeric identifier for every single citizen and resident of this country. The personal code contains a person's date of birth and sex, among other things. In Estonia, all pieces of information that are within the state system, medical data, driver's license, address, and so on, are connected to this personal code. The setup of this e-ID system was implemented already in 2002. There are different types of solutions carrying the e-ID in Estonia. First, of course, there are identity and residence cards. The ID card does not just carry the e-ID itself, but for Estonians it serves as the mandatory identification document in Estonia and also as the primary travel document for most of the EU. But there are also more exotic options. Mobile ID, for example, is a SIM card-based solution. So you can use a wide range of online services with your phone without having to rely on your ID card. Another mobile-based solution is Smart ID, which is an app with which you can log into many portals and do transactions as well. And we can clearly see that people like to use these alternative carriers as well. Another e-ID carrier is the e-residency card, about which we will talk in another video. All carriers of electronic identity work on the basis of a public key infrastructure system, or PKI for short.
All carriers of electronic identity work on the basis of a public key infrastructure system, or PKI for short.
This model uses two keys, one private, one public. The public key is available to anyone and serves to identify who actually made a specific electronic transaction. The private key is the one that is only yours. It is located on the card and accessible only with the PIN codes. In Estonia, these private keys are protected with PIN 1 and PIN 2. PIN 1 exists to authenticate yourself, so you can't just find an ID card on the street and use it to get access to a person's e-services. Then there is PIN 2, with which you create a digital signature, which has the same legal power in Estonia and the EU, just like a physical signature on paper. Only it's much easier, cheaper, and more secure than the latter. How many people in the world know exactly what your signature looks like? And does your signature always look exactly the same? That's extremely unlikely. Yet we seem to somehow trust pen on paper signatures quite a lot in day-to-day life. But because the e-ID provides a secure method for authentication, it also paves the way for signing documents digitally. How does it work? Well, let's take a look at this document sitting on my desktop here. It's a rental agreement that I want to sign with my friend Tobias. Tobias, come over here. So, how do we do this digitally? Well, it's simple. First, I will create a digital container into which you can drag and drop several files. In this case, it's just the rental agreement. Then I will put my ID card into the card reader on my laptop. Click on Sign with ID card, enter my PIN 2 like this, and done. Tobias, you prefer using mobile ID, right?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, then you just enter your phone number and personal code here.
Now I see the control code both on the laptop screen and on my phone, which confirms that we have a secure connection. So now I'll enter my PIN 2 and confirm.
Thank you, Tobias. And this is how you can digitally sign documents in Estonia since 2002. Did you see how easy that was? This is why Estonia saves 2% of its GDP every single year. Any signature that you might have to give at some point, you can give from practically anywhere in the world as long as you're connected to the internet and have an e-ID carrier. Tying all of this information together into one e-ID is extremely helpful. As such, people living in Estonia don't need to carry a physical driver's license or some kind of health insurance card. All of that information is linked to their unique personal code. As a result, you don't need to carry 20 different cards in your wallet at all times. Speaking of wallets, In most countries, people still carry lots of cards for different private sector loyalty programs, whether it's for a restaurant or their favorite shoe shop. In Estonia, many private companies have opted to use the e-ID as a basis for their loyalty programs, so I can use my ID card instead of having to carry 20 separate cards at all times. The same is true for many state-related services. For example, many Estonians have the right to drive, but don't carry a physical driver's license, because the information that I do indeed have the right to drive is connected to my e-ID. That's all the police officer needs to verify. The necessity for some type of electronic ID is quite clear. It is impossible to use personalized online services without identifying yourself. But the real beauty of this approach is that every country can decide for itself what sort of carriers it wants to offer, whether it is a card, an app, or something entirely different. I hope you enjoyed this video and learn more about how the electronic ID works in Estonia. Next, we will talk about interoperability services, which are another crucial part of e-Estonia as we know it today.
And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name, or the name of the beast, or the name of the beast, or the name of the beast, or the name of the beast.
Jedes Mal, wenn eine Website uns auffordert, eine neue digitale Identität zu erstellen oder uns bequem über eine große Plattform anzumelden, haben wir in Wirklichkeit keine Ahnung, was eigentlich mit unseren Daten passiert. Und aus diesem Grund wird die Kommission demnächst eine sichere europäische digitale Identität vorschlagen. Eine, der wir vertrauen und die Bürgerinnen und Bürger überall in Europa nutzen können, um alles zu tun. Vom Steuerzahlen bis zum Fahrradmieten.
Vom Steuerzahlen bis zum Fahrradmieten.
Vom Steuerzahlen bis zum Fahrradmieten.
Eine Technologie, bei der wir selbst kontrollieren können, welche Daten ausgetauscht und wie sie verwendet werden.
The Great Reset is not going to control every aspect of your life. Let me give you a couple of things. They are now taking the next step to shape global, regional, and industry agendas, end quote, with a new digital ID system. Under the framework, the WEF proposes collecting data from many aspects of people's everyday lives. That's a quote. Through their devices, telecommunication networks, and third-party service providers. The WEF suggests that this data collection dragnet would allow a digital ID, now listen to this, it's very narrow. It would allow a digital ID to scoop up data on people's online behavior, purchase history, network usage, credit history, biometrics, names, national identity numbers, and medical history. Plus your travel history, social accounts, e-government accounts, bank accounts, energy uses, health stats, education, and I love this one, and more. What's left? Once the digital ID has access to this huge, highly personal set of data, the WEF proposes using it to decide whether users are allowed to, quote, own and use devices, quote, open bank accounts, quote, carry out online financial transactions, quote, conduct business transaction, quote, access insurance and treatment, book trips, still quoting, go through border control between countries or regions, still quoting, access third-party services that rely on social media logins, file taxes, vote, collect benefits, end quote. So, you know that passport that they gave you? It was so crazy to think that maybe that COVID passport might grow into something, exactly like this. In this Advancing Digital Agency, the Power of Data Intermediaries report, the WEF positions this digital ID framework as part of the solution to a trust gap in data sharing, and notes that vaccine passports, which were mandated across the world during COVID-19, do, by nature, serve as a form of digital identity. The WEF also praises the way vaccine passports have allowed governments to harvest data from their populations, I'm quoting, without notice or consent. Oh, I love that when our government does that, don't you? Quoting, at a collective level, vaccine data is incredible public health asset. Additionally, the WEF provides a specific example of how digital IDs could be used to authenticate a user by using fingerprints, a password, or identity verification technology, and decide whether they should be granted, I'm quoting, access to a bank loan by judging their profile, which may include biometrics, name, national identity number, and history, which may include credit, medical, and online purchasing history. The WEF goes on to suggest that digital IDs will allow for the selection of preferences and making of certain choices in advance, and ultimately pave the way for automated decision-making, where a trusted digital assistant automates permissions for people and effectively manages their data across different services. They're also talking about turning your heartbeat into a digital ID.